Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. In this episode, we're going to do a recap on my interview with Dale Meyer. So Dale had gone from a place where he was in his day job working. He wasn't getting paid very well. He wasn't valued in the way that he should be or felt that he should be, and he was just miserable. So he went on then to change the way he did things, the way he approached things, and the person who he was. You know, what he was basically sitting in wasn't serving him anymore. And he realized this and then went on to establish 5 businesses and also the Sequoia Project, which we'll talk about a little bit as well in this recap. So to start off with, what Dale and I spoke about was, redefining failure. The problem is a lot of people look at failure and see it as something to avoid, but there's some importance in failure. And that's what Dale and I explored and had a bit of a chat about. And we're wired when we're first born to fail. We're wired to fail because we know that's where we're going to get the glory, right? That's how we're going to get to the end game. And not only are we wired in that way, we're also celebrated in that way. If we stand up and take a step and fall, we're celebrated for giving that a go. We take 2 steps, we fall. Wow, you did 2 steps. And how we're wired is to look at what we did achieve in that situation, not what we didn't. But as we get older and we're surrounded by different people, different groups of people, whether it's caregivers or peers or, all of those other influences, we start to then apprehend towards fear. We start to avoid failure a little bit because it's not so much celebrated, right? In as much as, I don't know about you, but I know with siblings, if you fell over or you failed or you did something, more often than not, they'd have a laugh at you, right? So then we start programming the failure towards something that's uncomfortable, towards something that we're going to be ridiculed about and laughed at. And so we hold back a little bit. But what we need to do is go back to that original programming and actually embrace the fact that failure is the way forward. And it's about failing forward, right? Because the only true failure, as Dale said, is not giving anything a shot. That's when you're truly failing, because anything you do in your life, if you look back at everything that you've done and the things that didn't go the way you wanted them to, that didn't go to plan, are usually the things with the biggest lessons, right? So there that we get the biggest takeaways from those things. And I remember there was an interview I was listening to. I'm not sure of who the gentleman was, but he was a multimillionaire and he'd had a business that had completely failed. And they said, how do you feel about that failure? And was really getting into that space of, he lost a fair bit of money. He lost millions of dollars in this business. And his response was, that's the most expensive education I've ever had. Right? And that's how he embraced it. He embraced it as that was the learning curve. That was something for me to learn from and grow from. And that's really where failure kind of sits. But we tend to look at it from a negative perspective rather than the opportunities that it presents for us. And it's been something that I've really had to work on. So being an achiever, sitting in that achiever space and being kind of almost a perfectionist, I was at one point, I'm working on that, right? So being in that space, failure to me was scary. Failure to me questioned my own validity on, really, are you as good as you think you are because you just failed? And, something else Dale said that was really important is we are our own worst critic because we know our potential. And so when we're not reaching our potential, sometimes we can start that negative thought pattern, that negative self-talk, which then has us again avoiding things that are going to make us feel bad. And it's not just the people around us that make us feel bad. We're responsible for that ourselves, right? Which is not real clever, but we tend to do it anyway, unless we can come to that realization. Another thing that Dale said mid-interview, which really connected with me, was his mantra of, I want to be better today than I was yesterday. And I can really connect with that because that's my mantra too, right? We're on the trajectory of a, well, overuse the word journey, some people, but we're on a journey, right? Yes, we're focused a lot of times on the end game and we're really trying to get everything we're doing to align with that end game, but it's actually getting there, which is where the gold is. And we also spoke about this in my interview with Adam. We look at these goals and we think, yes, when we get there, and we get there for 5 seconds and we're like, okay, I've done that. What's next? So it's appreciating that journey. It's appreciating the pathway to get there, which is going to be filled with lots of failures and challenges and lots of successes. And, what we need to be careful of is how we're talking to ourselves. What are we setting up for ourselves? Because words are super powerful. And if you've been in any of my programs and you've seen the experiment that I do with words, you'll realize that words have energy connected to them and they sit with us. So we want to make sure that we're using the right words. Yes, there's a whole lot of psychology around how that affects your mental aptitude, but it also affects us in an energy perspective as well. So we need to be setting ourselves up for success. Another thing I spoke about with Dale was how the average person is dangerous. And we kind of reframed average person to someone being safe. That safe person, that person that's in that safe zone that, has the family, the house, the job, all of those sorts of things, the friends, but isn't fulfilled inside. Now, they're dangerous because they've got nothing to lose. They're, not to use this too literally, but they're kind of like, someone that's on their last legs, of what they can do in life at the rock bottom. They're kind of in that same space that they can only move forward. They can only go up because whatever they do, the worst case scenario takes them back into the safe zone. And so they have all these opportunities ahead of them. And they have all of these risks that they can take, if they so choose to, that can take them to the next level. And when we've got nothing to lose, and we've got everything to look forward to. And when Dale works with people in the Sequoia, I got it right the whole time through that interview with him, through the Sequoia project, it's about helping them become who they need to become to achieve their dreams and their goals. It's not always about what are the tools and techniques you need to take. You can Google that. You can chat GTP that, right? You can get all of that information from your peers and from other people around you. But what we can't get unless we find it ourselves is who we need to become.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
Now, there's people that can help you get to that space, and that's the kind of work that Dale does. And it's another way that we connect because that's what I do as well. My focus in my programs is, yes, there's some tools and some techniques in there, definitely. But most of it is about creating that awareness of self and helping you become better today than you were yesterday and leveling up into who you need to become. Dale said, someone that has a goal of earning $1 million might need 5,000 clients to do so. And when he asks the people that he's working with, do you have the capacity to service 5,000 clients? They're like, no, so it's building up, it's getting there. It's like trying to, put high pressure water through a pipe the size of my finger versus a pipe this big, right? You're going to get more water when the pipe's bigger. And so equipping ourselves and getting ourselves into that space where we're who we need to be, then just everything else comes naturally. We'll find the tools, we'll find the techniques, but we need to become who we need to be. And that means looking at things like emotional intelligence, looking at the priming and biases of things around us and how they affect it and how we can use that to our advantage. Looking at the way that we present to others, looking at what triggers us and how we can work on that, or even just be recognizing it and having awareness around it. If we touch now on the sequoia tree, and the Sequoia Project is the name of the project that Dale's working on at the moment, but the sequoia tree is really a great analogy that sits with leadership, right? So he was saying when it's in the right conditions, it's the fastest growing tree. And that's what we can do as leaders. If we set up the right environment for our teams, then we will have the fastest growing teams. We will have teams that are looking to grow and achieve. And the tree lasts, I think it's the oldest living tree as well, the sequoia tree. So it lasts a long time, right? And when the environment's set up right and when we've taken that growth, it doesn't mean it's going to be a short stint and it's gone. With the right leadership, we can keep that momentum going and we can create that stability for our team. And if we're really good in our leadership journeys and we set up spaces that have that really strong psychological space and psychological safety for our employees or our teammates or whoever we're working with, then they will then support each other, just like the sequoia tree does. So the sequoia tree's roots are very shallow, but they join up with all the roots of the other trees, right? And that's what keeps them supported during a storm. And as a leader, we can't always be there all the time. And so we need to be able to set up our teams to be able to use each other, to be able to rely on each other and feel safe doing so that they do. One of the points that Dale made was he was in his businesses running them, running himself down to bleeding fingernails and causing physical injuries because he was just too overworked, right? He just didn't stop. He was so focused on his end game. But that made him rethink. And that's when he started bringing in people to help him. That's when he started getting teams around him. He trained them and he gave them the concepts of what they needed. And now he just lets them do what they need to do. Right. So he's got 5 businesses and he's only involved as he needs to be. He's not actively involved in actually operating them or doing the logistics within them because he's been able to surround himself with the right people to do that. And that's a real key element of being a great leader, is surrounding yourself with people that you can trust and that people that have your back, right? And that's not going to happen without first them trusting you. We also talked about at the end, after we jumped off the call, we talked about the modeling, right? And we talked about how it's okay to make mistakes ourselves with things that we were doing. So during the interview, if you're listening to just the audio, you might not see it, but I'm just coming at the end of an illness and I was coughing quite a bit through it. And Dale's a superstar, right? What a professional. He just kept motoring on. And we had to stop a couple of times and just let me regain myself. But what we were talking about is, okay, when we go to publish this, and I said to him, if the audio is great, I'm still going to publish it because I need people to see that it's okay not to be perfect all the time. If you're a leader and you have that achiever in you and that perfectionism sort of streak, sometimes we're aiming so high that the people around us can be intimidated or think that it's not possible or available to them because it kind of sometimes looks superhuman, right? But let's be honest, we're not superhuman. We just push ourselves really far. So it's about recognizing when to take that step back. So we're not pushing ourselves into a space where our bodies are actually screaming out for us to stop, right? It's about listening to how our bodies are going, how our emotions are going, how our thoughts are going, and being able to come from a place that maximizes all 3. And then modeling that to the people around us so that our team and the people that are supporting us can come in from that same level. So they're not burning out and they're not creating injuries in themselves from not taking the rest that they need. And so that's another really important key takeaway that I got from the conversation with Dale. Another thing he said was getting out of his own way. And I kind of touched on that a little bit, but recognizing sometimes when you're holding things back. And sometimes if our egos are at play, and even though I've spent a lot of time working on my ego, it's still there. It still loves coming through. And it's about recognizing that, right? And it's about giving it space, but mainly using it for you, not having it use you. Right? And understanding how to do that. And that, again, is part of who we become to be able to be that strong leader. And so recognizing when it's time to get out of our own way, when it's time to step back, when it's time to rest, or when it's time to give the lead to other people in the team, when it's time to give and empower and give that responsibility across. It's a really important space to think about and to be in. And just using that support around you is really, really important. And I'm even in our personal sort of space, we sometimes don't recognize that we have great support around us. And whether you're in leadership or whether it's just in life, there are going to be times where you are going to be challenged through professional or personal things that come into your life. And knowing that it's okay to not be perfect all the time, knowing that it's okay to stumble and fall and scrape your knee, and that it's okay to reach out to other people for help is really important. And that, again, is part of who we become. It's about knowing when we need to show up and knowing when we need to cancel things. It's about knowing that we're strong in our deliverables and we hold our word, and knowing when to be vulnerable and have those conversations. And every time you hear someone speak, especially in the motivational space or the growth and development space, they usually speak on a particular topic. But it's also about understanding that there's a spectrum of these things. Right? When we're talking about, empowering people around us and giving them the ropes and teaching them to do what they need to do and leaving them to it, there's still a balance, or a counterbalance rather, that we need to be thinking about. You can't just let that happen all the time. We still need to slide up and down that spectrum and make sure that we're actually in the right spaces at the right time. And so I really loved my conversation with Dale. It was, even though I was struggling a little bit health-wise, I still got some really great takeaways. And it was really nice to connect with someone that had a few of the similar kind of mantras and views. And the Sequoia Project, how it's named and how it's so unique and evoking curiosity, kind of connected with me, because that's quite similar on how I came up with Catching the Octopus, right? It's a little bit quirky, and there's nothing wrong with being quirky. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you haven't listened to it, as I say every time, go back and have a listen, because there'll definitely be some key takeaways. Hopefully it's not too choppy when I do the editing, with having to stop and start for myself. But I think that there will definitely be something, at least one thing in there that you'll take away that could create a lot of change, or a lot of improvement, or a lot of inspiration for your own leadership and life. So thanks for joining into this episode, and I look forward to serving you again in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe, and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.